Welcome to the show. Today we're going to talk about freedom, chaos, and order, and how they relate to each other, and how they can be either in harmony or out of sync with one another, and what happens in each of those instances. So, if we begin at the beginning and we said, let there be freedom, and there was freedom, freedom being the first concept that we have, we need to define what freedom is. And the best definition sometimes is defining what freedom is not. Freedom is certainly not being able to have options or to determine one's life and one's choices in life. Freedom is the ability to do what one wishes when he or she wishes it, and how, and so on and so forth. Suffice to say that freedom, even though we define it as such, it is an elusive and subjective concept that requires further looking into as to why freedom is such a precious commodity and everyone is seeking freedom. And it is subjective because freedom for one person is not necessarily and does not necessarily mean freedom for the other person, and so on. So let's set the scene. We certainly know what freedom is, or we know a little bit more about what freedom can be. We recognize that freedom is no longer there when it is missing. We only have to go and speak with people in jails to realize the significance of freedom for those behind bars. They know that certain restrictions have been placed on them, and certain boundaries, and certain do's and do nots. And so it is at those times when freedom is missing, a little bit like the concept of health, when it is missing, then one can see it and one can appreciate it with tremendous clarity. Now, how is freedom defined? Freedom is defined by the number of options and choices and the amount of control and determination one has over one's actions in general. If the degree of control is such that one feels that all the actions that one intends to carry out are able to overcome the barriers to those actions and the goals are achieved, then one can say with some degree of certainty that he has freedom of movement and freedom of leeway and freedom of thinking and so on and so forth. So that is how we can begin to measure the degree of freedom that we possess. Why is freedom necessary? Well, as the French would say, liberté. Freedom is necessary because without freedom there can be no happiness, as most people know. Without freedom there can be no commerce. Without freedom there can be no progress, and so on and so forth. So again, we're going back to defining something by looking at what happens if it is absent. And where do we go and find freedom? Well, it can be in space or it can be in time. It can be in a geographical location. It can be found in certain nations and countries and so on. where there is more freedom than in others. So you can be in a physical location. Certain places permit certain things more so than other places, and it can be in time. In times when we no longer are bound by duties, and we have times for rest and refreshment and so on. And so these are and entertainment. So these are considered times of freedom and liberty. Now, you may say that this is all very interesting, but how does it relate to chaos and order? Well, it's quite simple. Although we are looking at a triad, really, this connection here between the three will lead us inevitably to a circle. So bear with me. When we have too much freedom, now imagine a nation with a society where rules are broken down, there is no bureaucracy, there are no limitations on speech, there are no consequences to action, there are no obligations and responsibilities to rights. There's simply the concept of freedom that trumps all other concepts. Then you can see that if we look at this particular society over time, and there are examples in history that do back what we say here, and references and so on, so the research is there, then we find that inevitably from freedom we slide towards chaos. First of all, we slide towards confusion because there are different voices that some say, well, in the name of freedom, we want to do X, and other voices that say, in the name of the same freedom, we want to do Y, and why can't we do it? Some want to go left, and some want to go right, and some want to go up, and some want to go down, and there we have the confusion. And confusion is still at a stage where we can exert a certain amount of control. If we introduce clarity and clarify and interpret correctly. However, when there is no check and balance to that confusion, we find ourselves in the realm of chaos. Chaos is much more difficult and insidious than confusion because with chaos we cannot predict and we cannot see a pattern of action happening. So therefore we started off seeking freedom and we ended up with total chaos. And you may say, are you an advocate for no freedom? Therefore you're a tyrant. And I would say no, because we haven't finished. We're still looking at freedom, chaos and order all together. And that is nature. That is nature, and these are the laws of nature. They were there all the time. When freedom becomes excessive and there are no laws or checks and balances, no humane laws, checks and balances, then society inevitably, and any organization certainly, would slide towards confusion and chaos. And when confusion and chaos reign, there is nothing but misery, pain, and putting the blame on others, and recrimination, and conspiracy theories, and so on and so forth, and fear and anxiety, and regression, and stagnation, economic, social, and so on, and in other spheres such as health and education and so on and so forth. We do find that when we are in the realm of chaos and confusion and lawlessness, that particular freedom that we cherished so much, that precious commodity, in the name of which we found ourselves in this situation, is no longer sufficient. We no longer want it. So therefore, nature says, the natural progression of things says, and science will back this up when we look at certain aspects of fundamental laws in science, such as entropy. After the destruction comes the rebuilding. After the chaos and the destruction of all the laws and the regulations and so on and so forth in the name of freedom, then inevitably, automatically, order starts to reassert itself. Because amongst the chaos and so on, order then comes forth in a manner that is neither planned or expected. It is spontaneous order. And in order to deal with the harshness of the chaos and confusion, at times the order is more than the natural order of things. It is more than that. It is a super order. It is a tyrannical, dictatorial super order that is there to come back and bring those laws that all and sundry in society have agreed upon to uphold and to abide by, even though some might not agree with them. Those laws then become effective, and those laws then become the guiding light for that society or nation, and those people in that society or nation begin to see that the laws are necessary. They are necessary because they are reaping benefits for society. There is less chaos. The more agreed upon laws and regulations, the less the chaos. And lo and behold, what we do have then is freedom returning, freedom coming back. So we're going full circle, but this one is a virtuous circle. It is a virtuous circle because we brought in the order and the freedom. And ideally, in an ideal society, we want to balance things such as there is only a certain moderate amount of order, law and order, and a good amount of freedom within the law. We really want to minimize the chaos in this instance and keep the other two variables to a higher level. And therefore, if we were able to do that, we would have achieved harmony in a society. Now, the difficulty we have is that after a few generations, we tend to forget. We tend to forget because in the name of freedom, the younger generation perhaps cries out for more freedoms and liberation and so on and so forth. And as we permit and we become more permissive in our views and more permissive in our actions in that particular society, then if the guardians and the guardians of the guardians are not adhering to this concept of freedom, chaos, order, then we can very quietly and very quickly at times slide into the abyss of chaos. And that is something that we really want to avoid, because the abyss of chaos is survivable, even though there is a cost. Freedom comes with a cost. It is survivable, but the cost can be at times great, because the the amount of descent into chaos is inversely proportional to the amount of superorder needed to restore the balance. And again, we take our cue from nature and science, and the exact laws of nature and science that tell us that that is the case. So harmony will keep us safe, prosperous, wealthy and healthy by keeping this triad and virtuous circle of higher freedoms, moderate order and less chaos. Thank you.